everybody in the building needs to know that and needs to know these are the markers, this is what we're delivering for. We went round in circles for quite some time.
Can I really recommend that you listen to that interview in full? There's some brilliant anecdotes, two of which I've just told my cross-question panel. Unfortunately, I can't relate them on the radio because they're a bit saucy. Right, coming up in the next hour, it is Wednesday's cross-question with the Liberal Democrat MP Christine Jardine. She's the party spokesperson for women and equalities issues and for Scotland. Jack Elsom is chief political correspondent for The Sun, making his debut on the programme. Siân Berry is Green Party MP for Brighton Pavilion. And Patrick Spencer, also making his debut, Conservative MP for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich. They are here to take your questions on 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp your question on the same number or text 84850. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, MPs have voted to reject Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch's call for a national inquiry into grooming gangs. Sir Keir Starmer says he's spoken with victims and says they want actions, not further delays. Here's LBC's political editor Natasha Clark.
Chris Filt, the Shadow Home Secretary, has said this is disgusting. Keir Starmer has used his supermajority in Parliament to block a national inquiry. And I think many people will say from the Labour Party, look, it is a bit rich for you to say this. You haven't implemented any of these recommendations from any of the other inquiries. What on earth are you playing at, trying to make this an issue now?
2 people have been killed in wildfires that are sweeping through the suburbs of Los Angeles. Tens of thousands of people have been forced to leave their homes. The Met Police has confirmed a Premier League footballer is still being investigated over claims of rape and sexual offences. The player, who can't be named for legal reasons, was arrested in North London in 2022. People in the southwest of England are being told to prepare for heavy snow and icy conditions this evening. Parts of Devon, Somerset, Cornwall and Dorset are subject to an amber warning for snow. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 5 points, 82.51. The pound buys $1.23 and €1.19. LBC weather, a clear and bitterly cold night for most, with widespread frost and ice. Snow showers for northern and western areas and a low of -8. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. Hope you're all watching on Global Player, because if you are, you will see I have a beautiful panel with me tonight. We'd have to my left Christine Jardine, Liberal Democrat MP for the beautiful seat of Edinburgh West. I think we can say that, can't we?
Oh, we can. We certainly can.
She's the party's spokesperson for Women and Equalities and for Scotland. To her left is Patrick Spencer, Conservative MP for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich, newly elected at the last election. To my right, Siân Berry, a voice and face that you will all know well, but she was first elected Green Party MP for Brighton Pavilion at the last election. We'll ask how she's enjoying it in a bit. And Jack Elsom is chief political correspondent for The Sun. They are here to take your questions on 0345 6060 973. And we'd love you, as I say, to watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, our first question comes from Albert in Croydon, who says, would the panel agree that Trump and Musk should keep their noses out of British politics? Christine?
Yes. This is going to be a short discussion. Yes, they should. Particularly Elon Musk. He's not elected to anything. He's not a British citizen. He's a businessman. He makes cars,
He's going to be part of the Trump administration.
Yeah, but that doesn't give him a right to tell us what to do or to try and buy a British political party, which is what he's been up to. I just think that we should just recognise the fact that the guy's an industrialist. He works for Donald Trump. But frankly, he's got nothing to do with British politics and should just stay out.
But, I mean, we give our opinions on American politics. Some of our party workers go and campaign for different presidential candidates.
We don't try and buy American political parties. And I think what this has maybe thrown up is the need to just look again at how we fund politics in this country. We've had a few scandals over the past few years about Russian funding, and we need to look at interference. But I think part of what offends people, certainly a lot of people that I've been speaking to, and if I'm honest, me myself, is that he's speaking from a point of not having any particular knowledge of the subjects he's talking about. He just seems to want...
Typical politician, then.
I wouldn't go that far. But, and also you contrast him with, he's a hugely successful businessman. You can't take that away from him. But look at hugely successful people of the 19th and the 20th centuries. Look at Andrew Carnegie, Bill Gates, Joseph Rowntree. What did they do with their money? They invested it in society and in trying to make a difference. Elon Musk is just trying to make Elon Musk's personal world better.
What about the intervention today from Sebastian Gorka? I don't know if you've seen that. We've been talking about it in the last hour, saying that Britain should take back the British jihadis in Syria. Otherwise, it'll damage the special relationship.
Well, that again is an issue for British politicians, for the government to discuss, for us to discuss in Parliament, and it's not something that I think we should discuss lightly, or that, Elon, this is something that we need to discuss seriously before people start making off-the-cuff remarks and off-the-cuff claims. It's a very serious situation, and it has to be looked at carefully, and just accepting what someone with little knowledge of the British situation thinks is not clever.
Okay, Patrick Spencer.
Obviously, I think that's a little bit overblown. You didn't hear many Liberal Democrats complaining when Obama intervened on the European Union debate, nor, by the way, any European
It was slightly different.
I don't understand how it's different.
Well, he was an American. He was an American in British politics.
Yes, but he was the American president, and he was making the sort of comment that you'd expect a British Prime Minister to make about American politics.
I think the problem is you don't like the messenger and you don't like the message.
No,
and as soon as those change, it suddenly becomes acceptable.
No, the problem is that Elon. You're right.
And Bill Gates, by the way, intervenes on our international aid budget, but because you like international aid, it's okay.
You're right when you say I don't like the message. I wouldn't disagree with that. But what I would disagree with is someone from any other country deliberately stoking up.
You call it stoking, he calls it commenting.
He calls it interfering. And you have to look at why he's doing it. If he becomes a member of the US government, his job will be to look at how they run America, not how they run Britain.
Okay, let Patrick have his say. But
for clarity, I don't particularly enjoy it when European politicians were calling us names on the Brexit issue. I didn't find it particularly helpful when British politicians comment on the first, second, and whichever amendment of the US Constitution. But that's the nature of living in a free democracy where freedom of speech is important and relevant. And sometimes you've got to put up with opinions you don't agree with, and I think it's healthy for us all to do that. On the issue around whether we should take back British nationals who have been involved in foreign conflicts. It's not an area I know a huge amount about, but I was really impacted by one of the former Home Secretaries, Sajid Javid, when he was asked why on earth we didn't give Shamima Begum the opportunity to come back to this country. And he said, having seen the analysis, having listened to the security officials and taken their advice, he felt that it was a real security risk to allow this person back into the UK. And from that, I will take his advice and say this is not a good thing to do.
That's always a difficult one, isn't it? Because he's not the only Home Secretary to have come out with that one. Well, I can't give you all the details for security reasons. And I get that, but it doesn't help the rest of us make up our own minds. I remember at the time when he made that decision being totally in favour of it, saying that we don't want that sort of person in this country. But she was 15. She was groomed, basically. Yeah. And maybe we'll come on to that a little bit later with a question on its own. Let's go to our other two panellists now and get their views on whether Trump and Musk should keep their noses out of British politics. Jack.
Yeah, well, I think that no matter what you think about their views, they are just too big to ignore. I mean, Donald Trump is going to very, very soon be the leader of the free world. We rely on him for extraordinary amounts of stuff, not just in Britain, but in the other Western world, defence being primarily the front runner with that one. And Elon Musk is probably one of the most, if not the most, powerful private individual in human history. What is his stake in British politics? Well, not much, although he does employ hundreds of thousands of people here through his different plants, and obviously is a big seller to us as well. I do think there is probably a case, Christine, about not liking the messengers rather than the message. I don't remember you complaining when Guy Verhofstadt addressed the Lib Dem conference to bash Brexit and Boris at the same time.
You addressed it. Yeah, that's fine. I accept that. But the question is, do I want him interfering in British politics? No, I don't. And the biggest thing for me is this attempt. That's what Guy Verhofstadt was doing.
Yes.
But the biggest thing for me is this attempt to buy and to buy.
He can't buy. He can't.
But he's already saying that, rules, so he's not going to be doing that, is he?
There you go.
There are strict rules on this.
There are, but do they need to be stricter? And do we need to look at them? Which is the question that comes up. I have no problem with Elon Musk saying what he thinks. Freedom of speech, of course, I will always defend it. But do I think he should be able to interfere? That's the key word, interfere in British politics. No, I don't.
Yeah. Siân.
I mean, there's interventions and there's interventions, isn't there? So with Elon Musk, what we're seeing is the pace and volume and level of knowledge and thoughtfulness. I'm trying not to throw around too many insults, but there's a relentlessness to it. It's almost like he's using auto-generated text and just firing things at us from across the Atlantic. And I do not think at all it's fitting and seemly that particularly the Conservatives, but also Reform are letting that kind of politics drive the political debate by putting down the amendment today, and I'm sure we'll talk about that separately. But there is a serious issue that we should be talking about in the UK amongst politicians in the way that we talk about it in the UK. And today I saw the leader of the opposition echoing a Musk talking point that he's been trying to suggest that Keir Starmer is personally involved in a cover-up, and she echoed that in the chamber. And I do not think that is a good development. I think we should be debating our own issues in the way that we normally do. It's beneath her office to be letting Elon Musk drive the agenda of British politics in this way.
You don't think there's any case for a review? Did you get a chance to read the media and the expose by the Telegraph on what's been going on? The grooming gangs, the systemic cultural abuse of young, vulnerable women.
Well, we've got a question.
I think we are going to discuss this issue separately, and I'd like to discuss this outside of the frame of the things that Elon Musk has been saying. That is what I mean. Every time he says something, we are jumping, and I think, I mean, your own paper, Jack, has criticised the fact that this agenda is being led by what you've called right-wing agitators, because Monk is retweeting Tommy Robinson, who is a corrosive and divisive influence on our city. And I think we need to be, as parties, talking cross-party.
I don't think you can be retweeting Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson's in prison.
It was an ancient retweet.
Oh, was it? Right.
Yeah.
Tommy Robinson's putting out.
So we in Parliament should be talking cross-party about this in the way that we should. We're grown-up elected representatives, and we are better than what has been going on in the last few days.
What I would say, especially with Musk, and listen, you know, as the only journalist in this panel, it's probably quite easy to kick all.
Thank you.
Sorry, Iain, to kick all politicians, but
and Christine.
Sorry, Christine. Of course, you know, distinguished career as a journalist. While Elon Musk, obviously a lot of the stuff he is saying, he is aligning himself with Tommy Robinson. He has said that he thinks Tommy Robinson is a political prisoner. Most right-minded people would disagree with that. However, an interesting byproduct of Elon Musk's tweet is that he has actually managed to, and most politicians haven't managed to do this in the past decade, actually elicited some change with the grooming gang scandal. By amplifying it back into the public sphere, do you think Yvette Cooper would have announced the measure she did a couple of days ago if Elon Musk hadn't managed to put it back under the political spotlight? Probably not.
But we do have this on the political agenda. This idea that we haven't had it is completely wrong. We have
not like this.
We have the Baroness.
Not like recent days.
Not with this kind of temperature in the media that we've had. And I don't like that. The last time things were this fraught, we had unrest on the streets. And I'm worried that is the direction that some people want it to head. And I think it's our job as responsible politicians to bring the temperature down.
A lot of the language has been, I think, unacceptable.
It's very,
Well, Patrick, can I ask you about that? Because Robert Jenrick has made some pretty punchy comments, shall we say. I've called them other things, which much to his displeasure. But do you support the kind of language that he's been using? And also, very few Conservative MPs have expressed any sympathy with Jess Phillips for what she's been through over the last few days because of Elon Musk.
I disagree completely. No, every single Conservative MP that I've spoken to in the tea room and outside, in the chamber, wherever, has said that there is a red line and it involves abuse towards MPs and putting MPs at risk. And as a new MP who is new to this world, I take that incredibly seriously. There is not a single MP in the House, let alone a Conservative, who would want to undermine Jess Phillips' safety in any way, and it should be taken very seriously. But to your point about Rob Jenrick's comments, that there are medieval cultures being practices or cultures being brought into this country, I think this is exactly the kind of thing that does need to be said, which is there is nothing wrong with saying that a culture which thinks it's acceptable to cut the labia of a young girl is inferior to standards that we find acceptable. The marriage of a younger girl to an older man, the sexual abuse
adhere to that kind of culture, which is...
I think you'll find... this is why we need a review, because I think these things do happen.
If he had said, there are some people who come into this country who believe these sort of things, he would be absolutely right. But he was basically saying... everybody who's a Muslim adheres to that kind of belief, and they simply don't.
That's not how I interpret it. There's 1.5 million Pakistani men in this country. By no measure do I think 1.5 million Pakistani men abuse young women or engage.
Nor do I.
And I don't think
the implication of what Rob Jenrick said was that he does.
I didn't see it that way.
Okay.
I think the danger is that you might not see it that way. We don't see it that way, but there are people out there who could take it that way.
And they take it as a licence to therefore do what some man has allegedly done to Jess Phillips and sent her sort of malicious communication.
And we've got to deal with that separately. And I absolutely think because what
so you don't think there's any link at all?
No, I think there's a link. But I think in saying something that is a truth, we should not stop someone saying something that is a truth by virtue of the fact it might have a negative consequence. We have to deal with the negative. If there is someone out there who has a deluded, Brexit was an example where someone committed murder because they thought Brexit was a bad idea. Does that mean we should have disbanded any public discussion on our relationship with the European Union? No.
We did do that. When the murder happened, we did suspend campaigning
for 24 hours, but we didn't. But
that's the point. There was an important point to make by doing that.
Okay. And just to be clear, the murder was because Joe Cox was in favour of Brexit.
Yeah.
And the murderer.
Don't you see the parallel you've just drawn, though?
Did I say in favour? Was not in favour.
No. But don't you see the parallel you've just drawn by bringing that up?
Because the rhetoric on Brexit could have got very toxic, and people adding to that toxicity did in fact lead to a murder.
That does not mean we cannot shut down the debate. We should shut down the debate, though.
No,
you don't raise the debate.
So that's the point. I don't think anybody's saying they want to shut down a debate.
Well, you're telling Robert Jenrick shouldn't engage.
No, I didn't say that. I said that he should watch his language.
The way he does it.
Just as anybody in this panel watches their language when we're talking about this subject, because we know that you say one word that could be misconstrued and it can have consequences. The parallel I drew was with Boris Johnson's letterbox comment, which I don't think was meant in a nasty way. It was a sort of a humorous off-the-cuff remark. And I know, because they phoned in to tell me, Muslim women were abused on the streets the next day because of that. Now, I don't believe Boris Johnson meant that to happen, but that was a consequence of loose lips.
I think the thing we always have to remember is something which a member of my family who did psychology told me, impact is intention. What you say, you may not mean it that way, but the way people take it is its actual impact, which, as a politician, we all have to be incredibly careful about every day. And probably, we have this in common. We worry about what we say and how people are going to take them. And I think that's the point that's important here. It's not that we have the debate. It's not that we, everybody's, free to question or speak their minds and speak freely. It's that you have to be careful about what you say. We're high-profile people in the public eye, and what we say can have damaging effects or implications that we may not mean if we're not careful.
Right, well,
I think
we've
that's
got
the point.
Another related question here, but we'll come to it after the break. It's 18 minutes past 8.
LBC News. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on Global Player. This is LBC.
Let me repeat who's on our panel. Jack Elsom, his chief political correspondent for The Sun. Christine Jardine, Liberal Democrat MP for Edinburgh West. And we have two newbie MPs, Siân Berry, Green Party MP for Brighton Pavilion, and Patrick Spencer, Conservative MP for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich. You've both been in the Commons now for 6 months. I imagine it's been a bit of a roller coaster for each of you. What's the one thing that you've experienced that you weren't expecting, Siân?
I mean, one of the things that really struck me was the debate on assisted dying, actually, and that was a really good example of politicians working very seriously and taking an issue, looking at it in lots of detail and really thinking and really listening to our constituents, and it was a really, really interesting experience. And when the time when I was told to expect lots of riotous behaviour in the chamber and it to be really loud, and when that vote was read out and everyone was very respectfully silent, it was very, very moving. So I won't forget that in a long time.
Patrick?
I think the one thing I've taken away as mates, pals and family have asked me what it's like is actually the very collegial nature between people from different parties, which is wonderful and a testament to our democracy and our civility. And I even knew some Liberal Democrat MPs before they got in, and some Labour MPs, and have got to make new friends. And it's a warm atmosphere.
Tell the whips that.
Yes. Well, we'll keep them on their toes.
Fraternising with the enemy.
Yeah,
most people say the mice, don't they? There's something they didn't expect when they come into the house in Westminster.
There is a problem with the heating. That is for sure.
Well, Siân, as a Green, you probably catch them and protect them.
No, I'm in favour of introducing more cats to the house, yes.
Right. OK, a text question from Harold, which, as I say, relates to our previous discussion. Should anyone who voted down a full inquiry on grooming gangs tonight be ashamed of themselves? Now, a Conservative amendment to the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill calling for a national inquiry into the grooming gang scandal was voted down by 111 votes to 364, and the Lib Dems courageously abstained. We'll come to Christine in a minute on that one. Siân?
My members voted with the government and voted against the amendment today, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. The phrasing of the way that question's been put to us is so divisive, so black and white, and we should be discussing the issue of child exploitation, the many, many ways in which young people, particularly young women, are exploited, the way that they're treated by the police when they bring complaints. There's lots and lots of work going on in politics to reform the police, to look at the Baroness J recommendations. The bill today was full of lots of improvements to child safeguarding, and the way that the amendment was done, it could have been done through amendments to the bill at a later stage, but it was put through in a way that would have voted down the entire bill, and I just think it was cheap, and it wasn't the right way to go about dealing with what is a very serious issue. I think Nadia Whittome from Labour, who spoke in the chamber today, put it very well and said, plainly, the real trauma, the real problems that these young women have experienced is being weaponised at the moment, and whatever action we take must be led by the victims and not by right-wing agitators. And so, we voted down that amendment. We want to work seriously cross-party on this issue. Sorry, which is what The Sun has described the agenda being led by.
Okay.
Clarification.
Sorry, not you. That looked wrong.
Christine, how on earth can a serious political party abstain on an issue like this?
Because it was oversimplified, and if we had voted for the amendment, everybody who voted for the amendment was basically voting to prevent a bill which is aiming at protecting children, looking after children, and that should be the important thing. Now, it may well be that there is a time to talk about an inquiry, but it wasn't tonight. This was not the right time to do it, and it was a purely political move, playing political games with the well-being of children, and that, I don't think, is acceptable. So we take the view that the thing that we should be doing is enacting the recommendations of Professor J's report. We've waited far too long for that. That we should be doing what we can immediately to support children, which is part of the Wellbeing Bill, which was passed through its second reading tonight. And if there is a time to discuss whether or not there is a further national inquiry, not revisiting what has already been done, enacting what has already been done. If there is a time to do that, then we do that separately on its own. But what we shouldn't have done, and we didn't do, is prevent this bill, which aims at protecting children, giving them the best possible system, to stop that.
Why didn't you
and
vote
I think
against
the people...
it?
Why didn't I vote against it? Because, like I said, we don't necessarily think that an inquiry would be wrong once we have dealt with this situation, because the grooming is horrific, and we agree with that. But if anybody should be ashamed of themselves tonight, it's anyone who was prepared to prevent a bill protecting children going through for a political
talking
point.
of which, Patrick Spencer.
Fantastic. I mean, where do I start? I should start actually by saying that I worked in the Department for Education with Josh McAllister on the independent review into children's social care, which brought up a lot of the recommendations that fed into this bill, whether it was strengthening multi-agency safeguarding arrangements, regional care cooperatives, family group decision-making. I would say this bill was poor, to say the least. It could have gone further on safeguarding issues. There was a whole load of things that we wanted to see enacted in government that weren't really included in the bill, including early help teams and generally putting more power in the hands of social workers. And that's before we get on to the schools aspect of the bill, which is, if anything, and, I can't believe the Labour Party had a problem with this, but we described it as, taking a sledgehammer to one of the few areas of legacy from the Labour time in government, the creation of academies, giving schools freedom, putting a rocket booster under the remarkable improvement in school standards that we've seen over the last 10, 15, 20 years. So not only did we think the bill was a bad one, but we thought that we weren't playing politics. There is a need for a national inquiry. And Siân, to your point about Nadia Whittam's point, girls being let down because they feel like they're weaponised, girls were let down because people didn't step in to protect them, I'm afraid, and a national inquiry.
So why didn't the Conservative government
either, did it?
Yeah.
We did do some things. I agree.
You didn't implement any of the recommendations from
no, I disagree. We accepted 18 of them. The one we didn't...
but you didn't implement them.
They were embedded in legislation that would have been taken through if it wasn't for the fact that there was a general election. But I would be the first one to accept...
Well, the recommendations were made in 2022.
Yeah.
It takes time to embed things in legislation. And on top of that, if I can have a chance to say, of course, we all wish we could have done more. I'm not going to say we were perfect on every level. But the issue on what we didn't accept, mandatory reporting, which basically says we can hold anybody criminally negligible who might have had a chance of spotting someone who was at risk of neglect or abuse. When we consulted the industry, the care sector on this, 51% of practitioners said they didn't want to see mandatory reporting. So policy, and Labour are clearly figuring this out now, is a lot harder than it looks.
So you govern by opinion poll?
Well, we work with the sector. But I think I have a problem with mandatory reporting.
The role of government sometimes is to lead, not follow public opinion.
I didn't want to see mandatory reporting introduced. Some people did. A lot of people.
But I think it was actually announced by the Sunak government, and
it was at the end
of the election.
Yeah, it was, and it was embedded in an amendment to the Criminal Justice Bill from 2000 and something. Yeah.
I mean, on the point of whether there was time before the last election to do all of this, I'm very aware as a new MP and talking to older MPs that we are doing many more days off sitting now than was happening at the end of the last administration. The last administration was not pushing through a lot of legislation to make sure things were done before they left in any way. There was a lot of space within the agenda to do more.
And that had been going on for years.
Yeah.
And you mentioned yourself, 2022, we had almost 2 full years after that for the government to enact the recommendations of the bill. And that's why so many of us are frustrated, because we should be further on the way on.
Well, I will be guilty of a bit of fence-sitting, because I think both things could be true. Today's vote was clearly a bit of a political ploy. It was an amendment to a children's bill, which was never going to pass because it was about something completely different. It would have torpedoed one of Labour's flagship pieces of legislation, which is fine, and they were never going to vote for it or any other way. But it still does not really get around the wider point that Keir Starmer is actually blocking an inquiry. So all this has done is put the votes on the public record. And you can bet your life on the fact that Labour MPs and their constituencies are going to have posters going up saying your MP voted against a public inquiry into grooming gangs, in much the same way that, it's obviously a less fraught issue, but in the same way that Tory MPs had, Labour designed posters going up saying you voted to put sewage into our rivers. And so there's still a bit of politics going on here. And I think, both sides are clearly weaponising the issue to a certain extent. Kemi Badenoch's amendment was never going to pass. Labour were never going to back it for that reason. It'll be interesting to see at a later stage, because I see the Conservatives have vowed to put it in other amendments. Maybe they'll use an opposition day debate to try and push that matter again. It'll be interesting to see what Labour MPs do then.
Jack, Tess in Acton wants to take issue with something you said.
Okay.
She says, Iain, I have to take issue with you stating that Jack is the only journalist on the panel. I didn't say that, Jack did. Jack writes for The Sun, which is not a proper newspaper and read by imbeciles.
I've got a thick skin, Iain. And if I had £1 for every time someone said that, then I'd be a very rich man.
But that is
the biggest selling newspaper
It's a
in
very
the
patronising thing to say that people who read The Sun are imbeciles, though. Do you get a lot of that?
I would get some of it, mainly on sort of, Twitter and social media, but,
Liberal Democrat MPs.
No, actually not. We
members.
We like the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you very much.
But listen. Obviously, we get that the whole time. The Sun is read by hard-working people who make up the backbone of this country, and to criticise them, I think, is to criticise the nature of being British.
Oh, we should have been playing Jerusalem. Right, we will take some more questions in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:31 news headlines with Daryl Jackson.
MPs have voted to reject an amendment calling for a national inquiry into grooming gangs. It was tabled by the Conservative Party after billionaire Elon Musk attacked the Prime Minister on the issue, which came to light under the previous government. 70,000 people have been instructed to leave their homes across LA as wildfires there continue to spread. 2 people have been killed and dozens of civilians and firefighters have been injured. An 18-year-old man's been arrested on suspicion of murder after a woman was killed in a drive-by shooting in North London. 44-year-old Michelle Sadio was standing outside a church after a wake in Brent last December. LBC weather, a clear and bitterly cold night for most, with widespread frost and ice. Snow showers for northern and western areas and a low of -8.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
8:34 on LBC. We have with us Liberal Democrat MP Christine Jardine, Jack Elsom from The Sun, Siân Berry, Green Party MP, and Patrick Spencer, Conservative MP. George is in Aberdeen. Hello, George.
Evening. Hi.
Hi.
So my question for the panel is that if we continue using fossil fuels like we are, we're going to see more extreme weather events like these wildfires in California and flooding like we see in Britain this week. So question is, what should be done to prepare for this, and shouldn't the UK government be doing more?
Well, in addition to the wildfires in Los Angeles, which have killed 2 people so far, there have been also floods affecting various communities across many parts of the UK throughout this winter. Siân, let's come to you.
Well, yes. I mean, I'll talk about leading the agenda. This should be leading the agenda at the moment. Climate change, the impacts of climate change on our daily lives are really important to people, and you hear more and more people raising this with you spontaneously, like George has done there. And this is 2025, and you'll remember at the beginning of the decade, in 2020, 2019 election, we were all saying, this has to be sorted out by 2030, and we're now halfway through this decade. So 2025 is crucial. And in the UK, we've got an absolute pile-up of new strategies and new things that are needed from this government. We need to put a net zero plan into place. We've got a big spending review coming up in terms of investment. There's a national infrastructure strategy that's still outstanding. All of these things need to be looking at not only the massive amounts of green jobs and improvements we can make from real investments in reducing our carbon footprint and all those things that we have to do under the Climate Change Act. We'll soon have a further comment from the Climate Change Committee, whose wording on how much little action we're taking, particularly on transport, has been getting stronger and stronger. But then we also need to think, in our infrastructure in particular, about the adaptation question, the flooding that people are experiencing, the fires we've even had in this country, the extreme weather that we are not prepared for. I do worry that we are going to see more and more things go wrong before we start to solve it. But this is an absolute red letter year for climate action, and I hope more and more people are thinking like George and going, this needs to change. And the new government does need to take some big decisions very, very soon. And I'm a little disappointed with some of the things they're doing. There's a lot of half measures coming out of Labour. For example, on burning oil and gas, they've said they've confirmed they're not going to licence more drilling for oil and gas, but they haven't said they would take away the licences that were approved but not fully licensed and implemented. And these are the kinds of decisions that they're only half getting right.
And
so I think,
they've gone back on boilers, haven't they?
They've slipped back on boilers. They were quite strong this week on diesel and petrol car rollout, and we're very clear there about the wider benefits to the UK of investing in more electric vehicles. But things like
Teslas,
reducing demand for driving and flying because you're investing in better trains, because you're investing in better public transport. They're behind on, and these are the big investment decisions that need to be made this year, in the first half of this year. So I hope you'll be having some more climate-focused questions in future programmes, because this is something that should be leading the debate, and we should be paying attention to the people all around the world, including in America, who are trying to make this the biggest topic that we talk about. And there's a lot of people in California today who will be making the exact same point.
Jack, if you go to your editor and say, I've got a really good climate change story, does your editor sort of explode with excitement or roll their eyes?
Not at all. We're definitely, we're not climate change deniers at all. All we say is that there definitely should be a green transition and a move to fossil fuels at some point, but it has to be done at a pace and with care that ordinary people in this country don't get hit in the pocket by it. So if you look at something like the electric car ban coming in for, is it 2030, isn't it? Is it 2030, isn't it, for the new sales of electric cars?
But only for new cars. This is quite a mild policy.
Sale of new diesel and petrol cars. Some car producers are saying at the moment that there is not enough appetite for these electric vehicles, and because if they go over the quota, they get fined an extortionate amount of money. They are just not producing now any more diesel and petrol cars or electric cars, which means that therefore the price goes up for everybody. And so it's trying to get to a situation where, yes, we want to move to an economy which is less reliant on fossil fuels. I don't think that's going to happen for a few decades, and I think that lots of people seem to have acknowledged that. But it has to be done in a way which is economically viable and doesn't hit people in the wallets who go around and work in this country. So I think a balance needs to be struck. It's probably the short answer.
And that's why the spending review is so crucial, because we need the public investment. And I'm very disappointed with Labour for not doing things like raising a wealth tax, for example, a tax on people's assets when they're more than £10 million would be quite an easy sell to the general public and would raise a lot of money for the kind of investment we're talking about.
There are simple things that could be done, though, things I find frustrating. And can I just say, George, it's great to hear from someone from Aberdeen. I spent 10 years in Aberdeen, and my husband was an Aberdonian, so I'll get all nostalgic. But there are simple things that we could be doing now that we are not doing, like sustainable aviation fuel is available, can be used. It's not a long-term solution, and it's not a solution for domestic flights. There are other things that have been looked at, but it would be useful for long haul. And Schiphol Airport already has rules about, you have to have certain amounts of sustainable aviation fuel. And we're not putting enough effort into finding ways of doing these things and doing them cheaper. And yes, we do need a green transition, and we do need it to work, and we do need to use the technology that we have in Aberdeen and the rest of the North East. The people who are developing are people like BP, who are developing algae that can be used as fuel. All of these things, we need to be doing more. But I think George's question is interesting, because he actually said, if I'm right, how do we prepare for this? Which is another thing. We're not actually preparing for it, and that's the thing that we need to be looking at the same time. We need to be looking at how we reduce our carbon emissions, but how we prepare for what is coming, because we were too slow in reacting. And we have to think about how we encourage other countries as well, because we are far from the worst offenders. We are actually one of the better of the larger developed countries. So we're not the worst offenders.
Better in Europe as well.
Yeah. So we have to be thinking about how we A, prepare, and B, we encourage other countries.
How do you sell that to people in this country, where I think that I think in Britain about 2%, isn't it, of global emissions? I think we contribute to the world economy, to the world carbon footprint, and people in this country who are often asked to pay through the nose for different green initiatives, but then look over to China or India or Saudi Arabia and see massive, great gas guzzling plants. How do you sell that to them when they go, well, what about those guys over there?
You make it worth a while is the way you do it. And you invest in making it sustainable, affordable. And at the moment, we're not doing that. We're saying to people, it's too expensive.
Fairness has to be.
I think actually the debate has matured quite substantially, and it's been interesting to see the union reaction to Ed Miliband's plans to deindustrialise, because you can say you'll make it worthwhile, but what you know is going to happen is you're going to see huge numbers of jobs lost in old industries, or you consider to be old industries, in parts of the country which rely on the extraction of oil and gas, and it's not going to be worthwhile for a lot of people. A measured transition is essential. Siân, you talk about mild policies of banning the sale of petrol cars. There's nothing mild for people who are forecourt operators, mechanics, people who are involved in the car industry who rely on those types of cars for their income.
No, on the contrary, the industry is quite keen on being helped to transition faster, but it knows that asking for it to do all the investment is not quite right. So like I say, the government this week was quite strong on the potential benefits there are for the whole country, helping the industry to shift and helping people to get these new vehicles.
Just following up on what Jack was saying, we've got a follow-up question here from John, who says, as Donald Trump doesn't seem to believe in I knew I'd do this.
Anthropogenic, they mean there.
Well, he says whatever. Climate change. Yes. And he intends to increase US use of fossil fuels. Does it matter at all what we do regarding net zero? And that's what a lot of ordinary members of the public who don't obsess about these issues like we all do, that's a difficult question to answer, Siân, isn't it?
Well, I mean, the US has been isolated previously on climate action. This happened under the previous Bush administration, the previous Trump administration as well. Europe is a very big unit in terms of population, about the same size as the US, and in Asia as well. You've got big conglomerations of countries with about the same amount of people. So the potential market for new developments that we do, the potential for our expertise, particularly in running, for example, new public transport systems. We've got some really flagship things going on in the UK now. Those sorts of things are completely exportable to huge amounts of places. So we we can play a really strong role in this. The US can't ruin everything for everybody on its own.
I actually agree with that, and I think we shouldn't just give in and say, oh, well, the Americans aren't doing it, so there's no point.
It's not just the Americans, it's the Chinese are to an extent, but not to how they need to.
Yeah, but it's up to us to continue to try and lead the way, encourage change. And the people who are driving it in many cases are actually, as I mentioned before, oil companies who recognise that it needs to be done, and they have a vested interest in making sure that they continue to make money. So they are investing in things like algae, hydrogen, all of that. We need to encourage that. But I would take issue with one thing that you said, and it's far be it from me to defend the Labour Party, but I don't think Ed Miliband has ever said that he wants to deindustrialise anywhere. I think what he's talking about is transferring. That's what the green transition is about. It's about encouraging an alternative industry. It's about encouraging the oil industry, which is dying anyway, to be decommissioned in a way that allows the people with the skills to transfer to new industries, to create green energy and work in a more sustainable environment and create jobs for the future. And believe me, I come from an area that was deindustrialised during Margaret Thatcher's government. I know about deindustrialisation, and I wouldn't support any policies that I thought were going to do to Aberdeen what happened to Clydeside.
Final word on this goes to Andy, who says all these green people should be arrested. Well, it's a point of view, I suppose.
Well, that was somewhat the view of the previous government as well.
Right, we'll take more of your questions in a moment. You're listening to LBC, it's 8:46.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Christine Jardine, Jack Elsom, Siân Berry and Patrick Spencer are with us. Text question from Chris in Brecon. I'm an old school Tory who voted Lib Dem in 2024, but it's clear to me that reform is energising the youth vote, and these people will actually vote, unlike the young left voters. Are the two major parties stuck in a Westminster bubble and ignoring those outside it? Jack, let's start with you.
It's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, for many years now, I thought that young people have almost appear to shirk the two main parties. Issues which are close to their heart include housing. Not enough houses have been built for the past few decades. And then I think Labour were very much banking on the fact that they were going to mop up lots of the young vote, and obviously they did to a certain extent, but it's interesting how in the past few months or so, it's the Reform Party that really seemed to be making a lot of inroads with that 18 to 25 demographic. And it does seem, especially amongst young males, there does seem now to be a lot of traction for more centre-right ideas. Potentially that's because a lot of them are struggling to get jobs. A lot of them are sick with the wokery stuff, which I think has infected a lot of our politics in the past few years. A lot of them, let's be honest, are being driven by bad faith actors online. And, I don't want to mention the words Andrew Tate, but he clearly is having some impact on all of that. Nigel Farage has now got 1 million, as he likes to say, in almost every other breath, 1 million followers on TikTok. And so I do feel that politicians who can harness social media are doing very well with the young vote, but I still think that when it comes to really trying to impress on young people, that you are the party for them, I think that the housing crisis is something which just has been looked over for the past few years now, and I think actually Labour, to their credit, seems to be starting, hopefully, to do something about that, but it's about spades in the ground at the moment, I think.
I think you make a really good point. It reminds me a little bit of 1983, which you and I will remember, Christine. And I remember I was at university, at a very left-wing university, and suddenly in the 1983 election, all of these Tory posters were going up because younger people have been energised by Margaret Thatcher. And I think Nigel Farage is doing, in a sense, what she did with that generation then.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but 1983, yeah, you're right. A lot of people were energised, and I think perhaps what's missing from the two major parties is some charisma. I mean,
not yours, obviously.
Not mine.
With Stuntman Ed,
but something that appeals to young people, and I think that is the problem. And I think there's always been a danger of the two major parties getting caught up in a bubble in Westminster and not thinking about it. And young people have had a hard time. This generation had their education interrupted by COVID. They've had their lives. They lost 2 years of your life, which when you're 22 is a long time. The housing market now is so different. When I was 24, 25, and had been working for a couple of years, building societies were throwing money at you to try and get you to take a mortgage. It's very, very different now. And I think what we need in government to do, what the Labour government needs to do, is look at what is happening to young people and what it is that they want from the government and start listening to them.
I'm going to ask for short answers here from our two other panellists because I want to fit in another question. Patrick?
I absolutely think this is a problem. Polarisation is a problem across all age groups, but it's particularly pronounced amongst young people. I absolutely agree with Christine that it's about energy, it is about passion, it's about vision, and I think young people, whether they see it in someone who's from the centre-right, the far-right, the centre-left, or wherever, will react well to it. I think policy is part of it. Of course, they want to hear answers on housing, on childcare, on capitalism, on equity in society, on crime, all those things, but they want to have a vision and a reason to be proud of where they're from. Why they want to have a reason to be kind of engaged in our politics. So, absolutely agree. It's one for all of us.
Siân?
I mean, the Green Party does do very well amongst young people as well. There was a report in Private Eye of a A-level politics conference where Nigel Farage turned up and was horribly patronising to them and was booed. And
really not.
I turned up and they liked me. It was fun. But basically, I mean, we focus on listening to young people, not just entertaining them. And I think the best way to really energise young people is to give them some hope. Really listen to their priorities, things like housing, things like the kinds of jobs they are being made to do. Those are really big issues for young people. And the Greens, we do listen and we are aiming to offer them some hope, and that will lead to more sustainable support. I think, maybe people are entertained and interested in the antics of reform, but I'm not sure that's going to lead to sustainable political commitment. And when you get involved in the Green Party as a young person, you get very involved. Our youth wing is extremely influential. You really feel like you're changing the world.
Well, I've got
you can join Reform PLC and I don't know what they want from you apart from your money.
Well, someone says here on a text, don't rule out the youth movements of other parties. As someone now quite old, I'm highly impressed by the Young Greens. They're leading the grassroots to protect their futures.
Yes, you have to listen to the Young Greens.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening. What would you like to ask?
In Parliament today, Labour MP Tonia Antoniazzi said she'd met with the English Cricket Board to call for the match with Afghanistan to be cancelled, given the current oppression and erosion of rights of women and girls in that country. Does the panel, including in particular the three MPs, agree with this? And should other countries be persuaded to join in with boycotting this country?
Well, Tonia Antoniazzi has coordinated a cross-party letter signed by 160 politicians, including both Nigel Farage and Jeremy Corbyn, Group Hug. I don't know if the three of you have signed this. Patrick, let's start with you.
Yes, I don't think I did. It went round, there's a lot of letters. It's something I should have raised when we talk about a new MP, is that you get asked to sign lots of things. I actually think it's a good thing. I would say I am nervous about the decision to kind of fuse politics and sport. There was a decision to stop Israeli players in a bowls competition earlier in the month, which I thought was deeply misguided. There were steps by the All England Tennis Club to stop Russian players playing at Wimbledon. Again, deeply misguided. But in this circumstance, and I think there is precedence here, you know, we didn't play the South Africans during the apartheid era, that it's probably the right thing to do at this moment.
Christine.
People say sport and politics don't mix, and it's true, they shouldn't mix.
Scotland and cricket don't mix.
Yeah, Scotland and cricket certainly don't mix, although I do love it. But I do think there are examples of where sport can change attitudes and can change. And yet you spoke about South Africa there, and yes, it's the classic example of where sport did make a massive contribution. Also simple things like Billie Jean King setting up a separate women's tour changed the attitude towards women in sport. And I think the point that Tonia's trying to make here, and is important, is that we cannot ignore what has happened to women's rights in Afghanistan since the Taliban returned. They had moved forward dramatically, and now they've gone back dramatically. And we have to use whatever means we can to bring that to attention and to try and put pressure on the Taliban to change. And while I agree that sport and politics shouldn't mix sometimes, they have to.
Sean?
I signed the letter. I'm our group lead on the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, so I did it in that capacity, and I think it was a really good letter. And in this instance, there's the wider issue of the treatment of women in Afghanistan, but also a direct link to the sport, because the Afghan women's team cannot play, and I'm a big fan of women's sport, and I think it makes the really good point that the England men should not play the Afghan men's team until the Afghan women's team are free to play.
Jack?
Yeah, totally agree. One of the first things that the Taliban did when they came back in 2021 was ban women's sports. Many of the people in the Afghan women's team had to burn their kit just so they didn't know they could be identified. Most of them had now fled the country, and so I think it would be a good show of solidarity, and not least because I think Afghanistan's actually breaching the International Cricketing Council, because you have to have both a men's team and a women's team.
They're the ones that need to act on this, not just the England cricket team. I actually interviewed one of the Afghan female cricketers, international cricketers, on the programme last week, and it was actually quite a humbling experience, because you just knew that she was never going to be able to play cricket again for a country. Right, our fun question is from Tim in Mansfield. Today would have been Elvis Presley's 90th birthday. If he had faked his own death and was still alive, what would he be doing now? Don't say dribbling in a care home, but Jack.
I think he'd be about to be sworn in by Congress to be Donald Trump's defence secretary.
Sean.
I mean, Elvis is still alive and he's 90, so he's obviously still a gigantic figure in the culture. If he's made it, I mean, he's a big fan of burgers. He's probably advertising healthy, vegan, plant-based burgers, which he has switched to some time ago in order to make it to such a great age.
Christine?
Well, I now have a vision of Elvis Presley at 90 in Congress in a white spandex suit, blue sweat shoes. Singing.
During the general election, one of the things that I was asked to do as a candidate was go to the Kesgrove Chinwag where they had the Elvis impersonator, and I've got to say, he was so good, he might just be in the middle of Suffolk being an Elvis impersonator.
I had a similar experience when Brandon Lewis dragged me along to a theatre in Galston Pier. No. And it was an evening of Elvis impersonators. Shall we say some were better than others?
So he's in Suffolk or Norfolk somewhere?
Suffolk or Norfolk. Draw whatever conclusion from that you want. Thank you to you all for appearing on the panel tonight. On Monday, we have the TUC General Secretary, Paul Novak, the Times columnist, Sebastian Payne, and the Labour MP, Stella Creasy. So do join us for that. Coming up in the next hour, Ryanair has issued a warning to badly behaved passengers as the low-cost airline sues a holidaymaker over disruptive behaviour. The company is claiming £12,000 in damages against the passenger, who they say forced a flight between Dublin and Lanzarote last year to divert to Porto. It was delayed overnight and caused 160 passengers to face unnecessary disruption, as well as losing a full day of their holiday. So my question to you is this: should we make drinking at airports socially unacceptable, or, wait for it, even ban it? 0345 6060 973. Have you ever experienced this disruptive behaviour on a flight also?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, MPs have rejected a Conservative bid to push for another national inquiry into child exploitation and grooming gangs.
The ayes to the right, 111. The noes to the left, 364.
The Prime Minister accused the Tory leader Kemi